Hello, managers. My name is Jen Hiscock, and I'm excited to talk to you today about managing remotely and managing remote workers. I know that sounds really cheesy, that I'm excited to talk to you about remote management, but I really am, because I've been working remotely for the last 8 years, and the last year of that has been as a manager. I've learned a lot of things along the way, and I think this is the type of thing that you really just need to discuss and learn about from other colleagues that are in this space with you. So I'm happy to provide this introduction today to what I think draws some distinction between typical Management 101 skills, which you'll find valuable in this context, of course, and what it means to be managing remotely. So just to give you a bit of context, I've been working remotely with different types of work. So 5 of those years I worked with a research lab. So very technical orientation, engineers and research scientists, that's possible. And 3 of those years I've worked with policy and program branches in Ottawa. And so I think you can do this. For me, it meant that I could take an education leave, move to Toronto, up my skill sets, and establish a professional network in the Toronto region that proved valuable for the mandate of the teams that I was working for in Montreal and Ottawa. And I think it would have been difficult for me to establish that sort of value working with the rest of the teams at either of those Ottawa or Montreal locations. So in the end, I'm convinced that I've gained, and my teams have gained, more than lost by having me work and manage remotely. And I'll try to explain a little bit of that through the course of the introduction today. So I organized this intro into 4 parts. The first part looks at 3 big shifts that I've recognized in remote managing. The second part gets to looking at a transition from the typical approach to management that you may have to getting to feeling like you're leveraging or taking advantage of a remote working environment. The third portion is just where I tried to summarize a lot of my learning and tips and tricks into one slide. And the fourth part is a reflection on career implications for remote work. So having been on both the receiving and the giving end of remote managing, I'd say the biggest difference that you'll recognize is you can't read the room. And so your typical approaches of looking for body language and active listening suddenly have to shift to much more active facilitation and visualization techniques to be able to draw people into your meetings and conversations. Any challenges that you might struggle with normally on communication and priority setting, establishing trust only gets amplified in this remote work environment as a result. Those water cooler conversations cease, and your engagement with your staff and superiors has to become a lot more intentional as a result. So in addition to the changes in communication, I think you'll see that the casual relationship building that was possible in an office has to move to something that's much more intentional for building those relationships and maintaining them. On the other hand, challenges you might have in the office dealing with office politics, or maybe the cacophony of noise that's around you in an open office environment, can be much more manageable with remote work if you're deliberate about the way you use your phone, email, and other mediums like Slack. And finally, the physical space that you're used to sharing with your team in an office environment now becomes a virtual space, and that has implications on how you get and stay organized and productive. So those are my 3 big shifts that I've tried to unpack a little bit more here. I'll highlight 3 of them. The first one, under communication, looks at how you've lost that face-to-face and body language, which means you've just lost 80% of the way that humans typically communicate. So you have to make up for that somehow with different tools and approaches, like using video sometimes, using other visuals, making sure that you've got time for check-ins and time for people to think and react, as opposed to just having it be a competition to be able to get your points in. All of this means much more facilitation, even for your normal meetings, than you originally thought you may need. Looking at the relationships, I think there's a real loss in a feeling of closeness or togetherness that can happen with remote working. So I wanted to share a story that really sticks out in my mind of when I had a manager surprise me and another remote worker with a gift of chocolates and a card from the team over the holidays. And I was surprised how much it meant to me. We knew that we couldn't participate in the rest of the holiday parties that were happening in Ottawa, but it just meant a lot to feel like I was really part of the team, that everybody went out of their way to do that. I don't think you need to spend money to do that, but those little acts of kindness and thoughtfulness really add up. On this third shift of moving from a paper-based system to information-based systems, I think you probably started experiencing this already, but the remote work environment is just going to accelerate that. You can't bring printouts to a meeting anymore. So what does that mean you're going to use to be able to engage people and keep them going with their other senses, not just audio? That said, if you find you're more of a spatial thinker when you're trying to get organized, there are some good online tools for you to organize your thoughts and your team's work. And when you realize that not everything has to look like a document you can print anymore, sometimes that's really liberating. You can have this whole map built out of your strategy and where you want to take the team, and you don't have to worry about whether it's going to fit on an 8.5 by 11 page. This last point on multitasking, I put an asterisk because I thought it was worth its own slide. Multitasking is so much easier when you're not in the room with people. So that challenge you normally have with everybody on their phones during your meetings is now 10 times worse when people are in their own home offices. I would say this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Coach yourself and your team, though, on proper use of this. Sometimes you need to be 100% present in a meeting, and sometimes you don't. So just make sure that these decisions to work on other things are deliberate and not an accidental bad habit. Otherwise, you risk losing all of the advantage of focus and productivity that you can actually gain from remote working. The second part, I wanted to move into an introduction to getting to the remote work advantage. So looking at all of these shifts and these approaches that I've discussed can really seem daunting when you start to dig into what it means for the day-to-day and for the longer-term thinking and planning. But I think you can take it in steps. And the first stage I would call the surviving stage, just accommodating remote working better. So that's adopting default habits like having WebEx and teleconference links in every Outlook meeting invite, actively facilitating those conversations during meetings to avoid the crosstalk, and monitoring your tone over text because that's most of your communication now. Once you get those habits down, I think you can start to move into considering how you can actually leverage having people working remotely. Remote working allows you to keep and attract new talent outside of the national capital region. And when you do that, it gives you much more geographic dispersion to be able to better engage stakeholders or fulfill your mandate for the whole of the country in ways that you hadn't considered when you think of everybody being located in the same place in the nation's capital. As I've mentioned, it really accelerates your transition to online forms of collaboration, and that can improve overall information management for the team and your collaborative efforts, making them more productive and your interactions with people more intentional. So those are the kind of two stages that I hope you'd be able to consider adopting this in for your team. As I mentioned, trying to do it all at once would be a big adjustment. So if you take it in stages, you'll give you and your team members a chance to discover their own advantages as team members start to feel more empowered by the flexibility and autonomy that comes with remote working. This is my toolkit that I tried to summarize on one slide for you. I've organized it in meetings, managing others, and managing yourself. I put meetings as its whole section because as managers, you're probably spending at least 2/3 of your day just in meetings. And if you can't figure out a way to get meetings better in a remote work environment, it's just going to be a huge drain on your energy. So I've got a few suggestions in here, including a recommendation on how to get your meetings on to the right foot by stop just asking who's on the line if you've got any more than 4 or 5 people joining you. I find that that's just a way to invite so much crosstalk from the beginning, followed by long periods of silence where nobody wants to talk over each other. And if you'd like a fluid, more engaging conversation, start it off right by organizing some kind of roll call or reaching out to get through the period of just understanding who's on the call and setting the tone for how all the participants can expect to be engaged throughout the conversation. On managing others, I wanted to acknowledge the idea of shifting from just managing those workers on your team who are remote to managing everybody as if they're remote. Otherwise, you can unintentionally create real disadvantages for the remote workers just because people who are located in the same space as you can get right in front of you and occupy a lot more of your time. So just be conscious of how you're scheduling your time and interaction between all of your team members, and try not to disadvantage unintentionally remote workers. And on managing yourself, I wanted to mention the feedback styles and routines. It's essential in any kind of management relationship to figure those out, but I'd say it's more so in a remote work environment because you've lost those subtle cues that you can pick up on that things aren't going well. So if you can carve out deliberate time for feedback for you on your management style as well as with your staff, that can help you with all those course corrections that you're going to need to make along the way. Finally, looking at career implications, I don't think there has to be any, but I will say that for managing remote workers, while it's completely doable, it works better if you and your team members can adopt online tools and enjoy some of the autonomy that's afforded through remote working in the way that you organize and manage your work. Those trust issues you're going to have to figure out pretty quickly, but I think that it's possible and it shouldn't be a barrier to considering adopting this more fully. The same thing goes for remote managing. If you're the one who's remote, I think it works better if your team is going to be able to adopt these online tools quickly and enjoy some of the autonomy that it affords in the way that they organize themselves and the work of the team. Finally, on looking at remote leadership and managing up, in my experience, I've found there's still a challenge with the current executive culture in this respect. It's a little slower to adopt those online forms of collaboration, and that could eventually pull you back into the office. But with the rapid pace of change in the 21st century of work, I wouldn't be surprised if this stops being such a barrier in the near future. So that's it. You can find me on GEDS or LinkedIn, where I'd love to hear about your experiences and best practices so that we can help shape this new working reality for the public service.